Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's the start of a new month, so let's go and take a look at what I read last month. So April 2022 was a fabulous reading month for me. It's the highest in terms of page count for quite a while, and also the highest, I think, ever in terms of the number of books read. Although some of the titles I read were maybe a bit shorter than my normal reads, it was still a fantastic month all round. Now, part of the reason that I read so many books, and certainly so many short books, was because I was taking part in a readathon, Realm of the Readathon, or Realmathon for short, created by Cassidy from Covers with Cassidy. I had a great time in a readathon. It was a really good experience for me, and I put myself together a list of books that I was really looking forward to reading, and it did definitely work out for me. It was a great month in terms of the books that I read and the quality as well as the quantity. So what I'll do here is the usual breakdown, taking a look at the stats first of all, and then going through the books themselves. There's quite a lot to get through, so let's just dive straight in. So I'll refer to my handy little notebook for the figures as I go along, but I read 9 books and 3 short stories in April. I won't include the short stories in any of the stats because it's not really worth doing, and also actually one of them I have no idea of the page count because it's not listed anywhere that I can find. I'll just talk about those briefly when I go through the individual books and my ratings for them. But overall then, not including the short stories, I read 3,390 pages, which if you exclude a couple of novellas from the averages works out at 441 pages per book. The average rating that I gave these titles was 4. For the year to date, that takes me to 10,125 pages, 498 page average if you again exclude any novellas that I've read, and the average rating is very similar as well, standing at 4.07. In terms of a series that I've gone through this year, I've started now 9 different series since the start of the year, finally finished one which we'll talk about in a few moments. Still haven't DNF'd any series, I'm up to date with 11, and that gives me 21 series in total that I can say I'm ongoing with, I'm in the middle of. And as of the date of filming, which is the 1st of May, days since my last 5-star read is standing at 1 because I finished a book last night and gave it 5 stars. Alright, so let's have a look at the actual books themselves. Most of these I don't actually have physical copies of. I did a lot of ebook reading, I had a couple on audio as well, but normally I tend to have copies in physical for a good number of the books as well. This month, not so much so. So the first book I read right at the start of April was Dogs of War by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a sci-fi that's been on my radar for quite a while. I like Adrian Tchaikovsky. I've read pretty much all of his fantasy. The only ones that I haven't read is the Echoes of the Fall series, which is on my hit list for this year. I've read a few of his sci-fi. I've got a couple more to come with Shards of Earth in a couple of months' time, hopefully. And Dogs of War and its sequel, Bearhead, are 2 of the ones that I was really looking forward to because I love his writing and his imagination. This one was no different. We feature Rex, who is basically a giant dog. He's I forget what they call him actually, bio something, but basically he's a genetically engineered weapon. He's part of a group of bioforms, I think that was the word actually, and they go off on various missions for their human masters. And within that group, we've got Rex as the leader. He is this massive dog, as I say. He is practically, not totally, but practically impervious to bullets. He's got massive guns on his shoulders, and like the others in his squadron, he's got communications abilities as well, so they can talk to each other and they can talk to their human masters who are naturally somewhere far away at a safe distance. With Rex, we also have Honey, who is a bear, we have Dragon, who is a snake, I think it is, and we have Bees, who, well, they are basically a hive mind, a collective of bees. And it's a really interesting concept, which is pretty much what you can say about all of Adrian Tchaikovsky's work. This particular story I didn't enjoy as much as some of his others. I just felt that there wasn't enough to it. I wanted a bit more of the kind of meat on the bones. It was a 400-page book, so there was plenty of opportunity for it, but we also kind of covered quite a bit in there as well. Some parts of the story were a little bit confusing. It took me a little while to kind of track down where exactly we were and what was happening with some of the changes in perspective that we had. And it was also kind of annoying in a sense with these almost telepathic seeming abilities of communication. They were always introduced in the story. So with Rex as a point of view character, you would have communication. He would say, my channel, say something, and then it'll be Honey's channel, and Honey would say something. So it's kind of the normal dialogue tags that you get in any work of fiction, but it's just portrayed in a different way. And after the first few, it was a little bit annoying maybe. It just took me slightly away, because I would expect that you just have some sort of abbreviation, or maybe you don't need it. Like if you've got a back and forth between two characters, you don't always have the dialogue tags because it is obvious who is speaking. Overall, I felt that this story was maybe a bit of an exploration of AI and what would we do if AI progressed to a certain point where it became self-aware. There's always that conversation that is had in various parts of the world, and this kind of holds the same story, except that it's bioforms, these genetically engineered animals, instead of AI. Overall, it was a pretty good book. It's not my favourite Tchaikovsky, but I am glad that I read it, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. Next up was a review copy that I started reading just at the end of March actually, but I read most of it in April, and that was The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. I'm not going to talk too much about this one because I do have a dedicated review that you can find linked in the top corner up here. But I really enjoyed this one. I kind of came out of it maybe not liking it as much as I do now. I do find that sometimes with books. My rating kind of matures, I guess, sometimes, where I take a few days and I let the book sink in and I think about it. And sometimes the kind of rating that I give at the end of finishing the book, the gut feeling, will go slightly up, and sometimes it'll go slightly down. With this one, it was slightly up. I did give it 4 stars, and I do stick to that, but my overall kind of feeling is definitely improved with a little bit of distance away from the book. It was a really good one though. I'm loving my time in Vigrid with the Bloodsworn saga, and I'm really looking forward to the 3rd book in the series. Next up, I did a couple of review copies that were kindly sent to me by the author G.M. White. So first of all, I read The Swordsman's Intent, which is a novella, and then I read The Swordsman's Lament, which is the actual novel itself. The Swordsman's Lament is book 1 in the Royal Champion series, and The Swordsman's Intent is kind of the origin story really of our main character. So the main character here, my mind just went blank for a moment. I think it's Belasco is our Royal Champion, and in The Swordsman's Intent, we've got a bit of a murder mystery going on basically, and he's trying to find out what's happened. And it was a really interesting one. There's a couple of little twists and turns, including some where I was led down the wrong path. So I like that even though it's quite a short novel, it's clever enough to have those little twists and turns. There's no real kind of side plots in this. It is very much straightforward, and partly because I guess it's not a first person story, but it's definitely one of those stories that specifically focuses on our character, and we don't really have many other kind of point of view chapters, but it was still quite good. I would have liked a bit more meat on the bones for it. I do say that quite a lot actually with short books, but I guess that's what happens for someone who likes big books as a general rule. Now, The Swordsman's Lament was really enjoyable though. The Swordsman's Intent, as I said, was the origin story, and it basically tells how Belasco became the Royal Champion in the first place. So, bit of a spoiler there, I guess, but that is definitely explained in the synopsis. We know that's what we're getting into with this novella, so there's kind of no way around that really. Both of them though were really good. I really enjoyed my time reading these as quick reads, and I gave both of them, The Swordsman's Intent and The Swordsman's Lament, 4 stars. Next we had my first series finish of the year, which was the Tide Child trilogy by R.J. Barker. So I was reading this as a buddy read with Nina, and we read The Bone Ships, Call of the Bone Ships in the previous 2 months, and then in April we finished off with The Bone Ships Wake. This was pretty much action-packed most of the way through. It had I think if I remember rightly, it had a slightly slower start than Call of the Bone Ships, but there was loads of action in here overall. It was a little bit confusing at some points, and it's a very kind of confusing world overall, I think, but with this one, it was still a really good time. There was a lot of emotion in this one. I didn't feel that I was as affected as many people say that they are when they read this one, but it was definitely a good time, and I thoroughly enjoyed the overall journey of this world with all these bone ships and Archesians and all of these weird and wonderful kind of creatures and plant life and so forth. And the main part of it, and kind of the main unspoken premise of this world, is that it's a world without any trees. It's never mentioned because they don't have words for trees because there are none. And essentially, you've got all of these boats and ships that are made out of dragon bones, and they're made out of geon stalks and things like that, giant leaves essentially from these plants. But there's no actual trees to provide proper wood. And I thought that was, first of all, a really interesting concept, but also I like the way that it's just completely avoided. It's not touched upon at all. And in one of the channels actually for the Realmathon Readathon, there were a few of the guys in there who were also coincidentally reading the three books at the same time as Nina and myself were, and they didn't actually pick up on the fact that there were no trees in this world. And when they realised it, it was kind of a hands over the mouth moment. How could I have missed that? But it's just not talked about whatsoever in the book. It's just kind of conspicuous by its absence, essentially. Overall, the story was good, the characters were good. I loved the way actually that the very start of the Bone Ships was revisited at the end of the Bone Ships Wake. So I like how we got that kind of full circle, drawing us back to where the story started. So definitely a good overall experience, and this was another 4-star read for me. Then I read another review copy that was kindly sent to me by the author. This is The Empress of Beasts and Mist by Ginevra Mancinelli, and this was in many ways a surprise. I did enjoy this, but I mentioned it a few moments ago. This is definitely one where, although it's quite short, a couple of 100 pages, I really wanted some more meat on these bones. So we are, 271 pages rather. But overall, the story itself was quite good. It was quite intriguing in terms of the world and the characters. This is, again, it's not a novella, but it's a prequel story to the overall series, A Hello of Talons and Tears, is it? Yes. And I'm really interested to get into that one. I feel like it could be a really good, interesting story. This was pretty shocking for me, I suppose. There is a big old list of trigger warnings before you get into the book. I wasn't really surprised, therefore, that they were in there, but what I was surprised by was probably how explicit some of them were. I wasn't really expecting the real graphic explicit sex scenes that I had in here until I got to the first one, and I was quite surprised by it basically. So we did have quite a few of those in there. I would say that the sex was more graphic than the violence, although there is some pretty nasty torture that goes on in here as well. The issue that I had with this book, really, because I can look past all that, the one thing that I couldn't really look past was pretty much the second half of the book, where we started to have some time jumps, and some of the little chapters that we had in between these time jumps didn't really cover a lot of ground or a lot of time. So it felt that the second half of this was really rushed, and that kind of undid pretty much all of the hard work that was done in the first half of the book. So a real story of two halves for me, and the second half just didn't quite live up to it. So overall, I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Then I moved on to another quite short one, again about 270 pages, that I've been looking to read for quite a long time. This was another buddy read that I did with Nina, and it was The Luck of a King by Tom Dumbrell. Now, I say this was a buddy read. We started it kind of at the same time, although I then took a day off because I was just finishing reading something else. And within the day and a half that I was away from this book, Nina had read the entire thing. So that tells you what she thought of it, I guess. It was a really quick read. She really enjoyed it. For me, it took me a few more days to read it by the time I did get back to it. But again, I had a good time with this one as well. There's no kind of real magic or anything like that in this world. It's just a straightforward fantasy world where we're talking about the characters and we're talking about the politics and we're looking at kind of the warfare aspect of it rather than magic and magical creatures or anything along those lines. The story was maybe a little bit obvious if you look at kind of the synopsis and you read the first couple of chapters. I had a pretty good idea where it was going to go, but I was pleased to see that there were some good twists and turns within that as well. Again, with this one being quite a short book, there wasn't a lot of detail in some of the areas that I would have liked to see beefed up, and it did mean that some of the decisions that we had in here were a little bit too quick and convenient for me. Something happens, and I would expect a bit of discussion about it, maybe taking a bit of time to come to terms with what has happened and to make a decision on what we're going to do next. But instead, these characters pretty much heard this revelation and said, yeah, all right then, let's carry on. So that was the one kind of downside for me. I would have liked to see a bit more depth to some of those scenes. There was also, I can't really say too much about it without spoiling it, but there's also one character who we just miss out on a big bit of development of, and not just in terms of the character himself, but his story of what's happening during that period that we miss out. So overall, it was a good book. I gave this one 4 stars as well, but I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more. Next up was one of my TBR kind of veterans, one that's been on my list for a long time and it's been on my shelf for ages, and you can see there's a space there where it isn't at the moment because it's right here. The Black Coast by Mike Brooks. I've been looking forward to this one. I finally got round to it. I did the audio on this and really enjoyed it. It was a really good audio performance by the narrator. I liked this book. It was definitely, well, I can't really say it wasn't what I was expecting because I had really been told what to expect from this book. Originally, when I first heard about it, I thought it was all going to be about warfare, raiders and dragon riders and things like that. And it wasn't really about that. And I appreciated that actually, because what we got instead was actually a really good and quite unique story, or at least in terms of the stories that I've read, and especially for something as chunky as that. With this one, we had two nations who were pretty much at war with each other. They are historical enemies. We've got a nation of raiders, and they haven't raided for, I think it's 10 or 12 years, but they suddenly turn up on this other nation's shoreline, and instead of turning up to raid, they've basically brought everyone with them. They've brought the children as well as the warriors, and they've basically come over to settle because they are being chased, they are running away, and they are trying to settle in this new land. And the story that we get here is one of two very different cultures coming together and trying to live together, and I really liked how that worked. So on the one hand, you've got these two people who have always been at each other's throats and they're trying to get over that kind of animosity, and you've got the one group who are trying to see if the other group is actually being genuine in their intent. They're not just trying to trick them, they are genuinely trying to live peacefully alongside their kind of former enemies. And on the other side of it, you've got the language barrier as well, because there's very few of the raiders who can speak the language, and none of the people from the Black Keep where the raiders have turned up, none of them can speak the language of the raiders. So that makes it really difficult, but I like the way that it is handled throughout the story. One thing that a few people have pulled up as being a real negative about this book is the way that there is no kind of formal word I. So with this one, instead of saying I, the people will refer to themselves in the third person, and all of the characters do this, but I'm not sure whether that's because the raiders who do it are mimicking what the people from the Black Keep do because they are learning their language, or maybe it's that the raiders have this same convention. It is covered right at the start of the book. It basically tells you about the naming convention, so you know to expect it and you know kind of the reasons and the mechanics around it. It is maybe a little bit jarring when it comes up in the book, but you soon get over it, or at least I did, and it didn't impact my enjoyment whatsoever. Just as an example of this, one of the things I will say, if I was getting married, for instance, at a certain point I would be asked a question and I would normally say I do. And in here I would say, this man does instead. So it's just little things like that, but it's so easy for me to get over. And I liked that the author was brave enough to do that as well. Overall, really enjoyable story. I liked the characters, I liked the storyline, I liked the concept, and this one got 4.5 stars. And then the last book of any length that I read in April was, again, another review copy that literally just came out or came to me at the end of April, and that was The Exile by Ryan Cahill. So this is book 2.5, 2.5 in the Bound and the Broken series. Now, the novellas in this world, you've got The Fall, which can be read either before or after of Blood and Fire, but this one, The Exile, really should be read after of Darkness and Light. In here we learn a lot about one of the characters who's introduced in Of Darkness and Light, and it wouldn't be the same if you were to read it beforehand. Even though the chronology of the world and the character, it does take place before the novel Of Darkness and Light. I really enjoyed this one though. I liked the character of Dane, the terrors that we had in Of Darkness and Light, and this one gives us so much more to him. It gives us all of his, well, not all of his backstory, but it gives 4 key parts of his backstory. It's split into 4 sections covering 4 main events, and it really builds on what we learn of him in Of Darkness and Light. The book itself is really well written. It just continues the evolution of Ryan Cahill's writing, and I really had a good time with it. The battle scenes are brilliant. There's some gut-punching emotion in here as well. There's some really good characters who we know from the series who come into this story, and that was a really pleasant surprise for me. So Belina is one of the kind of side characters who I really enjoyed. We spent a bit of time with her, and she was a real high point of this novella. And we also had another character who I won't mention for spoilers. Belina gets mentioned quite a bit, but I won't mention this other one. But he or she had some really good points, and there was some real kicking emotion to their story towards the end of this book. So I really appreciated that one. Overall, I love this series. I'm having a really great time reading them. Each book is definitely building on the world, the lore, the characters, and my enjoyment of them. And like its predecessors, for me, The Exile scores 5 stars. Now, just very quickly, I also read 3 short stories as part of this readathon. So the first of those was The Dragon's Boy by M.L. Spencer. I read this one as kind of an introduction to her writing and to the world that we will see in Dragon Mage when I eventually get to that one. So this one did pretty much what I wanted to. It introduced me to some of the aspects of the world and how dragons work in this world and how they interact with the humans. So I quite appreciated that. I don't know how many pages this one was. I would say somewhere in between 25 and 50 as a wild guess, but I've got no frame of reference for it. I was just reading and enjoying it. But within those pages, we obviously don't get a lot of time. It's just one little snapshot, one little story, but it does actually manage to tell us quite a bit about the magic and the dragons of this world. So I quite enjoyed this one, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I moved on to The Century Blade, which is kind of the same concept as far as what I'm looking for. This is part of the Mortal Techniques world by Rob J. Hayes, and I was looking forward to this one again to get an idea of the world and the magic and things along those lines. I did get a bit of a world with this one, a bit of the kind of backstory of the almost the history, I guess, of the world, but I didn't really get much else from it. So I didn't feel like there was any connection to any characters or even any one kind of event, even though that's kind of what we're looking at here. So probably for me, the only thing that I really felt that I took away from this one was a little brief introduction to the world, but mainly it was just an introduction to Rob J. Hayes and how he writes. As far as that goes, from what I could tell from this kind of 25 or so pages, his writing was absolutely fine. I think I can get on with it, and at least I've ticked that off because that's one of the things that I was looking to find out from this story. And then the third short story that I read was one about mermaids, randomly enough, for my kind of tastes. This one was called Sirens by Sienna Frost. So recently, if you've seen my most recent book haul video, you might have seen that I picked up Obsidian Awakening by Sienna Frost, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. So I took the opportunity with this one, because it was just free to download on Amazon, to read Sirens and again get an idea of the author's writing style. So as far as that goes, it was pretty good. Again, it was only about 20 odd pages, so there's not a big frame of reference. There isn't the opportunity for the author to kind of get really detailed and in depth and do any world building or anything along those lines. But the actual writing style itself was fine and I can get on with it, so that's a big thumbs up from me. The story itself was a bit of a weird one. It was a nice little take on mermaids and the way that kind of they work and what they're looking for, and also a little bit about love in there as well, which I thought was quite well integrated into the story. So it was a little bit unexpected. I liked it actually. I liked the kind of twist that we had on mermaids here, and it's definitely one that I liked. I wouldn't read a full length story from this because it's not really my thing, but for a short story of 20 or so pages, it did its job actually, and I was able to quite enjoy it, and it's another one that I gave 3.5 stars to. So there you go, that was 9 books and 3 short stories that I read in April. A really good month in terms of both the quality and the quantity of stories I consumed. So let me know in the comments as usual down below, how did you get on in April? What did you read? What did you think of them? What was your favourite? Don't forget to do the usual YouTube liking and subscribing. In the description box below you can find links to all of my social media and support the channel links, including my Discord server, which I've recently made public, and my new Patreon as well. Thank you very much for spending your time with me today. I'll hopefully catch you in the next video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.